as expected, two new commanders have come into Rise of Kingdoms, but unexpectedly, they are not leadership, but rather cavalry commanders. Zizka here, and also Joan of Arc. But the big question is, how good are these commanders? Are they deserved of your universal heads? And who should invest in these commanders? Stick around in this video to find out. What's up, everybody? Psych out here with another Rise of Kingdoms video. Two new commanders have come into Rise of Kingdoms, both cavalry commanders, not leadership commanders. Look, I know there were leaks out there ahead of time suggesting that these might be the two commanders that came into the game. I don't like to talk about that kind of stuff. I want to wait and see what commanders actually come in before we start speculating about what those commanders are and what they're going to do. But in this case, it does seem like we have gotten two cavalry commanders and we've skipped over the leadership commander cycle. I don't exactly know what that means, but what I do know is that we've got these two new commanders to talk about, and they'll be coming into the game in approximately 1 week. Joan Zizka is a Mightiest Governor commander, so it's going to be about 2 weeks for him to come to the game. Today is Sunday, or rather Monday in the game, so it's going to be an entire week, and then he'll show up in the Mightiest Governor event, and it'll be an entire week of that event before anyone will be able to acquire this commander. And of course, because it's a Mightiest Governor event, you're limited on the number of gold heads you can get, so you'll have to be investing universals in him if you want to expertise him right away. So what about this commander? I'm going to talk briefly about this commander. I want to spend most of this video talking about Joan of Arc. She's much more appealing to me, in part because she is an open field commander and I do a lot of open field fighting, whereas as you can see here, Joan Zizka, or I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I'm not too worried about it, is a garrison commander. So both are cavalry, but Joan here is a garrison commander. And let's take a brief look at his skills. The first skill does a lot of damage factor, and actually it's enhanced by the expertise, so we're just going to jump right over there. We see a big damage factor, bigger than Nevsky's single target damage factor, which is really, really strong. And then when his troops, so that is the garrison captain's troops, are less than 50% remaining, which in long-running garrisons is a long time, they actually start to do AoE, which looks like it might be circular because it mentions radius to 3 troops. It's a pretty small damage factor, but that's a little bit of anti-swarm technology that he has going on there. We get a bunch of stats here. We see some attack for cavalry, some defense for cavalry, and a skill damage bonus, which is really interesting. And of course, because given that he already does a lot of skill damage, he has some normal attack reduction, and this is kind of an interesting one where he can remove the buffs of the attacker. One of the things we don't know here yet is how that's going to work. Is that just removing the buffs of one of the attackers? Like, for example, if his garrison is being swarmed, does he have a probability of removing the buffs on all of those attackers? And how does the cooldown work? Because there's an 8-second cooldown. Does the cooldown count on him, or does it count on each attacker individually? We really need to do a lot of testing on that just to see how good that is. But if it could reduce the buffs from all of the marches and have even though there's a long cooldown there, if it could do it to all of those marches at the same time, that would actually be a fairly powerful buff removal effect there as well. He also gives some cavalry health bonus, so a little more tankiness, which a lot of garrisons need. And then he also does some extra normal attack damage with some kind of a proc trigger effect, about a 10% chance that he'll get that, and he'll do that for 3 seconds. And again, there's a cooldown on that. So it's an interesting commander. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, the natural pairing that I think everyone would think is going to be with Jadwiga, so you can do a full cav garrison. I also think there's a natural inclination to think that these two might go well together in Ark of Osiris game mode, where there is a lot of swarming. It does seem like there would be a nice synergy there. The concern I have with these two commanders in Ark of Osiris game mode is when you're stuffing troops into garrisons in Ark of Osiris, YSS is really the guy, because you could put in mixed troops. I think I have YSS unlocked up here somewhere. You can put in mixed troops with YSS. He actually has an advantage of having mixed troops. I think it's... which one is it here? Well, first he gives buffs to all troops, so any troop doesn't hurt him. Maybe it's not a bonus for mixed troops. But anyway, the point is that he buffs all troops, and so there's a lot of advantages to having mixed troops, or you can put mixed troops in, and that's a big advantage in Ark of Osiris game mode, because you're just trying to fill that garrison with anything that's nearby, and having to concentrate just calves can be a real challenge. So I'm not sure if the Jadwiga with Joan garrison is going to show up in Ark of Osiris, but it has real potential, I think, in KVK. So we'll see as the commander comes out. Now, I'm going to spend the rest of this video really talking about Joan of Arc. I think she looks extremely powerful in terms of an open field commander. And of course, you know, this is something I like to do. And we're going to talk a little bit about her skills, and then I'm going to talk about some pairings for her as well. So the first thing we see here is a pretty good damage factor, a 2,000 damage factor with AoE up to 3 targets. I think the most comparable person here is CPO Prime. If we could get back up to CPO Prime. Yes, so here we can also see a 2,000 damage factor with 3 targets and some kind of a debuff. So that's very, very comparable to what we see with Joan, where we have the 2,000 damage factor, 3 target AoE, 15% reduction, just like CPO Prime. But we also see some buffs instead of a debuff to enemy targets. We see buffs to the own troops, right? So Joan's own troops, the troops that she's commanding, will do an extra 5% damage. But we also see some rage restore to nearby troops, and it's a really nice rage restore, 20 rage. We like smaller numbers of rage gain because of rage cap. I've talked about that in other videos. I'll try to put a card at the top so you can check out videos where we talk about rage and how all that kind of stuff works. But in any case, this is a really nice rage buff because not only is her march going to be getting that rage, the other marches nearby are going to be getting that rage. And because it's only 20, they're unlikely to rage cap, but it's over a 3-second period. So you end up getting a total of 60 rage altogether, which is really, really nice. We see a bunch of cavalry stats here. We see a lot of attack. We see some march speed, and then we see some additional march speed when we're marching off of Alliance territory, which is kind of interesting. And then we see some normal attack damage bonus, which is kind of like a throwback to the Joan of Arc. That's the epic Joan of Arc. Okay, so then what else do we see here? We see some extra damage when attacking troops. I think this means it doesn't do this extra damage when attacking garrisons. But if you're attacking troops in the open field, you get an extra 5% cavalry damage from Joan of Arc. And we also see some normal attack damage bonus or some sort of a buff to normal attack damage that can be triggered. Is triggered every time you use the skill. So when Joan uses the skill, she gets this damage buff, and there is some cooldown, a 5-second cooldown on that buff as well. And then this skill, I think, is probably the most interesting, the one we'll spend the most time talking about. We see some cavalry health, which is, again, more stats, which is nice. But this here, where there's a 100% probability, once you have this skill maxed, of firing her active skill, Sacred Banner. That's the name of the active skill, Sacred Banner. 100% chance of firing that again when the secondary commander uses their active skill. There is a 10-second cooldown. So if you're thinking, wow, I'm going to fire this skill off every 6 or 8 seconds, I'm going to get a triple skill cycle, it won't quite work that way because there is a 10-second cooldown. But basically every other skill cycle, you're going to get an extra skill, right? On the first skill cycle, not on the second, but on the third skill cycle, you'll get it again in all likelihood with Joan of Arc. So that's a really, really kind of crazy amount of skill cycling you can do, and the damage you can do, given, again, that it's AoE, it's a pretty high damage factor. And she has all of these other attack and extra damage buffs as well. You're going to see a lot of damage coming out of Joan of Arc. She's not very tanky. I'm not that worried about that. 10% health, which is nice, but it's not a whole lot. We see some extra 5% counterattack damage, which is really, really useful. And then if the target troop has more than 30% troops, so that is they're actually high health, it does even more damage. Again, this is really powerful in certain situations. I think in Ark of Osiris situations, or in situations where you're trying not to bring a march all the way to 0, this is going to have a lot more damage. So look, we see a ton of damage out of Joan of Arc Prime, or as it's called here, where you see it with the little letter P. And so I think what that means is, and she's cavalry commander, there's really a very, very natural pairing for this, but we'll see how it works in practice. I think there's maybe 2 natural pairings. There are other pairings you can try, right? I'll mention a few other sort of tries, right? You could go with Bertrand. You can go with a whole bunch of other kind of cavalry commander. I mean, if you wanted, you could pair with Khan. I mean, there's a whole variety of cavalry commanders that you can go with. But I think the 2 most natural pairs are, one is XY. Obviously, XY has this reduced rage. If he has a Horn of Fury, we're talking about XY firing off skills very, very quickly with a Horn of Fury, and of course he has this reduced rage requirement, and he has an additional rage reduction here now, so he's down to firing at 850 rage, 15% lower than the typical commander. Plus now Joan's giving a 20 rage buff for 3 seconds. I mean, it just seems like, boy, this can really skill cycle very, very quickly. He also does AoE. He has an AoE debuff. It's not as big of a damage factor as hers. Hers is 300 bigger. But again, if you go XY primary to fire off skills very quickly, it's actually kind of an interesting situation because of her cooldown. You might actually only fire her every third turn because of the way the skill, because XY can fire skills so fast. But I think nobody's really going to care about that. I'm saying right here, this will be the highest DPS march on the field. If you can go XY primary, Joan of Arc Prime as the secondary, the DPS on this march will be insane. Of course, this is largely going to be a glass cannon. XY has a bunch of attack. He's got some march speed. He's got some damage bonus. This is, of course, just when attacking cities, so it's not really relevant here. But he does have some cavalry damage bonus here on this skill. And then again, additional skill damage, which again, with Joan of Arc, with a big skill damage behind. I mean, this looks like a crazy DPS march right here, XY with Joan. If you thought XY was a target on the open field before, wait until you see XY paired with Joan. People are going to be coming for this march without a doubt. Which brings me to the second probably logical viable option for Joan of Arc would be behind a Nevsky, or you could even go Joan with Nevsky. That might make sense as well. One reason to put Nevsky as the primary is because of this skill here. He does an extra 25% skill damage, but when he uses his active skill, it will trigger the skill damage bonus on the secondary commander skill, an extra 35%. So we're just talking about a total of 60% skill damage bonus on the secondary commander. If that secondary commander is Joan of Arc, with her AoE and the possibility, 100% probability, if it's the first skill cycle, of firing that again. And this effect should still be active because it lasts for 4 seconds. So both of her AoEs, it basically should be, we'll have to see how it works when it gets in game, but it ought to be a back-to-back AoE from Joan if she is the secondary. What we should see here then is a 60% skill damage boost to that really large AoE from Joan. So Nevsky is certainly much tankier than XY. Obviously, he won't have as much DPS, but he does do a lot of single target damage. I've talked a lot about Nevsky on this channel before, so this is another logical pairing. And of course, that just leaves one more commander out there, which is William in terms of our top cavalry pairs. I've talked about what are the top pairs in the game as well right now. I'll put a card at the top for that video, which I think you can take the information from that video and adapt it to what I'm saying here to figure out what are the top open field pairs in the game today. And William would certainly be still in that mix. Obviously, a pretty good sized damage factor. It does AoE, and he has a whole bunch of attack and other stats. And then he has some buff here where he actually increases rage. You're adding more rage. So I don't think Joan William, I mean, maybe that will be a thing. Maybe people will go Joan William, XY Nevsky. That's a real possibility there. But I think you can also go put William either behind XY or behind Nevsky. So really with these 4 cavalry commanders, we have really top tier open field cavalry marches, XY, Nevsky, Joan, and William. That's going to leave commanders like Chandra to the wayside. But the other thing that it does is it frees up a commander like Honda Tadakatsu. A lot of people play Honda behind their XY right now, and for a lot of good reasons. He does a lot of AoE. He's got some march speed, which is really nice, some extra attack, troop capacity, and some skill damage bonuses. There's a whole bunch of reasons to like XY behind, Honda behind an XY, but in any case, the point is that this actually frees up your Honda to go to a lot of places. And there are a lot of places you can use Honda. You can use Honda behind, for example, a Scipio. So if you're running Guan and Alex, you can run a Honda Scipio, Scipio Honda, and feel pretty good about that. You can also run a commander like Nebuchadnezzar. If you're not running Nebu YSG, you can run Nebu with Honda, and then you can do something like what I'm doing right now is pairing Boudica Prime with YSG. So you can go Boudica Prime with YSG and Nebu with Honda as the secondary, which gives a lot of march speed to those archers, which is really valuable as well. So I think that's the big picture here, is that with Joan of Arc coming to the game, Honda can be freed up to work in a whole lot of places. And I think those are the most natural pairings. Look, like I said, there's other cavalry commanders. There's Chandra, for example, you can use as well if you're looking for another legendary commander to pair with Joan. But I think those are the real ways to go, is those 4. We've got William, Nevsky, XY, and Joan. Those will be the 4 meta cavalry commanders. In which way you place them, that's sort of up to you. Joan has the support tree, which you might think, well, that's an interesting option as a primary commander. I think the decision to put her as primary or secondary really depends on who is the other commander, right? If you have XY, you probably want to go with XY as the primary. If you're pairing her with Nevsky, there's a really good argument for going with Nevsky as the primary for that skill damage bonus that I talked about. If you're going to pair her with William, I'm not sure I would do that for a couple of reasons. I think I'm not 100% sure, but maybe these skills, I think his skill is a passive skill, so maybe they will stack the Rage Restoration. So maybe it'll work with William, but I feel like the synergy is going to be a little bit better if Joan is with the other two, but you could certainly go Joan William. In that case, you definitely want to have William as the secondary, him having the attack tree. And there is one more pairing with Joan of Arc that I sort of don't want to talk about, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. This is something that I had been thinking for a while, and it has to do with this skill here. And the real key here is that it says when the secondary commander of this march, whether it's Joan or somebody else, that's what we assume, when the secondary commander uses their active skill, then there's a chance, 100% chance, when you have this max, that she will cast her active skill again. And there is one commander who casts his active skill not just when he hits the full rage meter, but that is Harald. And we're going to talk about this. It's sort of a weird pairing. I don't think a lot of people would think about using Joan Harald. And look, I don't think it actually will work in the open field. But let me point out a couple of things about Harald first. First of all, he doesn't have much. And look, I'm not a fan of Harald. If you've watched this channel, you know that I'm not a big fan. He does not do a lot that is infantry specific, right? So he has a pretty decent damage factor. He has some surround bonus, some increasing the damage for some period of time when he uses his active skill, which is really strong. This is a skill that's only relevant when rallying. This skill does do a bunch of infantry stats, so you won't get the benefits really of this skill if you paired with Joan. But this skill is the real key one, is this fourth one here. There's a 20% chance of him proccing his active skill at any time. There is a cooldown on this skill of 5 seconds, but basically he can proc his active skill, and when he does, like let's say on turn 1, Harald procs his active skill. You're running Joan with Harald as a secondary. If he procs his active skill on turn 1, then Joan will also, according to the text, proc her active skill on turn 1 as well, which is again an AoE, big damage, adding rage, very powerful skill. And of course, because of this skill here, this skill here, we see that after using an active skill, they actually gain an increased 20% damage. So we're talking about him firing his active skill on turn 1. We're talking about buffing this by 20%. We're talking about increasing the damage that this march is doing. We're talking about increasing more rage. We cycle again fast. I don't think this will be an open field march, and the reason is because I do think losing out those infantry stats. The other reason I think that it won't be an open field march is because both of these have a cooldown, right? So there is a cooldown of 10 seconds here. Harald has a cooldown on his skill procking as well on this 4th skill proc. But I can tell you where this is going to be used, and it's going to be so disgusting, and that is in poking, or what some people call cheeseburgering. So you're going to see Joan with a Harald secondary popping out of cities, and all they're going to try to do is to proc this skill. You've got a 1 in 5 chance of proccing the skill on maybe turn 1, again 1 in 5 on turn 2 if it didn't proc on turn 1. And once that skill procs, you're basically going to get 2 active skills. You're going to get Harald's Axe, which is single target, but you're also going to get the AoE damage from Joan of Arc, which is really just pretty crazy. And because of Harald's little bit of anti-swarm technology, assuming you have him maxed, you're actually, even if you get swarmed, not going to trade all that bad with this march. So look, I do think this is going to be kind of disgusting, but this is almost certainly a way that this is going to be exploited. We're going to see Joan primary, Harald secondary popping out of cities, doing these kind of hits, trying to pick up some quick and cheap kills. These two commanders are coming here in just a few days. Joan is going to be on the Wheel of Fortune. I'm going to be spinning that Wheel of Fortune 184 times, or whatever the maximum number of spins is, to get as many Joan of Arc sculptures as I can. And when I do that, I will, let's see, I'll show you here. I will be using these Universal Commander sculptures to put into Joan of Arc and expertising her so I can get her going right away as we continue to fight in this KVK. While we're here, I'll give a very, very brief KVK update. Tomorrow, the level 6 passes open up. And that is right over here is one of the level 6 passes. The other level 6 pass is down over, let's see, where is it? Right here, over this way. And so these two level 6 passes are going to open up, and that's when we expect to see probably some more fighting, right? So these kingdoms are going to be piling into this zone. This is us over here. We've made a little bit of progress into this zone 5, but as you can see, right here where my arrow is drawing, this is just a massive wall of forts that our enemies have put up. I think they've used somewhere close to 70 forts total now in this zone, given all the forts that we've burned. You know, and I do think the game makers have to really think seriously about what's going on with the forts, because it just is, it's a really slow process, you know, to come on and log into the game and go, there's just forts, that's it. And they're not being defended, you're just burning them, and you just sit and wait for forts to burn. But that's a different topic for a different day. Look, I think these new commanders are definitely going to be game-changing for sure. Everyone is going to be using Joan. Joan will be a must-use commander on the open field without a doubt. Jan, we'll see. We'll see if he's a must-use commander in Garrison. I do think there's some real potential for him to be used with Jadwiga in the sort of KVK, possibly in Ark of Osiris, but almost certainly in KVK, we're going to see John on the field. So look, thanks so much for coming by. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next one.